Theseus, an ancient character who really lived from ancient Greek mythology. He was a founder hero like Perseus and Cadmus and Heracles. And as they all had to do, he had to battle and overcome foes. And he emulated Heracles' famous labors with some of his own labors, where he went after some very disturbed and violent people and got rid of them. But Theseus is most famous for the tale of the Minotaur. And within his story is also a cover up in history. Besides this whole God is Zeus and Satan is Prometheus, and the cult of Jupiter Sabazius is based on these ancient giant cronids out of ancient Phoenicia and Crete, who spread out all over the world. Let me prove this to you. Now, let's get into some of the beginning of Theseus. Theseus was a Greek, and his people had previously done something to a King Minos, who was a king of Crete. And King Minos married Pasiphae, and Pasiphae was the daughter of the Titan Helios or Hyperion, and it had to have been from another woman besides Basilia, but he had other children, and I believe Circe was the other daughter of his. But Pasiphae had married King Minos, and they had children. And King Minos had a son who was very beautiful and gifted, and his eldest son was named Androgeus. Now, Androgeus went to Athens to take part in the Pan-Athenian Games that were held every 4 years. And being very strong and gifted, he won all of them, but they didn't like that. They were jealous of King Minos' son for doing that, and so they killed him. And because of that, King Minos had waged war on the Athenians and won. And he demanded that every 9 years, 7 Athenian boys and 7 Athenian girls were to be sent to Crete to be devoured by the Minotaur as an atonement, and that would go on as long as the Minotaur lived. Now, they did one round of that, but from what I can understand of this story, and then on a third occasion, they actually may have done 2 rounds of it, possibly, but it may have been on the second or third round, Theseus volunteered to slay the monster and go along with this group of 7 boys and 7 girls. And when he went, the daughter of King Minos, whose name was Ariadne, fell in love with him. And she devised a plan to save him and gave him some string to find his way out of the labyrinth that this Minotaur was in. And he was going to take her and marry her and take her away once this was done and escape with the Athenian children. So she helped him, and when he went into this labyrinth, he did kill the Minotaur and found his way out, and he took Ariadne and the other escapees with him to an island called Naxos. Now, this is where things get tricky. There are multiple versions of what happened to Ariadne. Some say that she ended, basically what had happened was Theseus took her to this island and then he abandoned her. and he went on his way. And so some say she committed suicide. Others say he abandoned her because Dionysus wanted her. And Theseus was told either in a dream or directly to let her go, and that Dionysus would take her. Now, Dionysus would be related to Ariadne because King Minos was the son of Zeus, apparently, and so was Dionysus. So he would have been the uncle, I guess, of Ariadne. And so Ariadne ended up with Dionysus. Now, the story gets tricky because there are multiple versions in Diodorus Siculus and other writers as to what happened to her, and especially in Nonnus as Dionysica, which I'm going to get into in another video, which tells quite a bit about the life of Dionysus. But some say she committed suicide, others say she was murdered, others say that she was killed in a war between, I believe it was Perseus and Dionysus, that was instigated by Hera but was stopped. I believe this is a cover-up and that she ran off with Dionysus and they went to Egypt and reinvented themselves as Osiris and Isis. And she had to do it because of her history, which I'm going to get into, which kind of intertwines here with Theseus. But she was his wife. She did marry Dionysus, and she was honored with this crown, and her name, Ariadne, was given to certain stars. But I believe she lived. I believe they faked her death so that the enemies couldn't find her, and reinvented themselves. And I've already proved to you Dionysus is Osiris. Ariadne was his wife, and I believe she reinvented herself as Isis and would wear wigs and a different appearance in Egypt. But let's get back to Theseus. Now, Theseus and this Minotaur. Well, this Minotaur was supposed to be half bull, half man, and it was now this is where it gets very salacious, from a union of Ariadne's mother, Pashape, and a bull. And the famous inventor Daedalus had built this mechanical bull, female bull or cow, for a Pashape to crawl into and mate with this real bull that wandered up. It was a white bull that wandered up on the shores of Crete, and she was a little goofy and fell in love with it and committed the act of bestiality with it. Now, it's said that this produced this child that was part bull and part human. I'm not sure I'm buying all this. Perhaps this child was deformed and they used this story as an excuse. Although, who knows in the weirdnessness of this planet what could be, and who these people were and what goes on. Technically, that's an impossibility between species, although there are certain species, like I think a horse and a donkey or something like that can mate. They're different species, but close enough. But I don't find this a plausible possibility, but this is what the story says. Okay, so Daedalus helped Pashapi do this, and ended up building this labyrinth for this Minotaur to stay in, and the children of Athens would have to come and go through this labyrinth, which they couldn't find themselves out of. And when they got to the center, I'm sure that this Minotaur, who was some kind of a man, would club them to death and actually cannibalize them, or eat them. So Theseus was successfully able to kill whatever this man creature was, called the Minotaur. It could have just been a man with a cow's or a bull's head on him, and paying back the Athenians for what they did to Androgeus. But he killed this Minotaur and escaped, and went with Ariadne to Naxos. And after that, Theseus went on his way, and he emulated Heracles. He went on these journeys where he would go after these very evil people. And I'm going to read about his 6 labors in a minute. And eventually, after he had done this, he married, but he married a woman named Phaedra. That was his second wife. And interestingly enough, she's listed as the second wife and the daughter of King Minos. So this was the sister of Ariadne that he married. And she ended up falling in love with a son that Theseus had from an Amazon woman. And Theseus' son was through Hippolyta. And his name was Hippolytus. And she fell in love with him, but he didn't want anything to do with her. And so she made up a story that he wanted her. And when questioned about this, Hippolytus came to see his father, and he got into an accident with his horse and chariot due to the stress of it, and he died. And then, having learned this, Phaedra committed suicide. So Theseus is left alone. So, and then Theseus, because of all of this, was eventually kicked out, and it's said that he also became one of the Argonauts, so he has a history with that. But kicked out of Athens, he ended up dying on foreign soil. Now, I also want to give you just a quick little background on what happened to everybody after Theseus went through Crete. And basically, King Minos was enraged when he found out where this Minotaur came from. And he was going to go after Daedalus, the inventor. And Daedalus has quite a history. He was a famous inventor and very proud of that. And before he came to the island of Crete, he had taken in a nephew, and the nephew was a little brighter than him and was inventing various things, and he didn't like that, so he killed the nephew and buried him. And he got found out and had to leave, and then he ended up in Crete with King Minos. And so after he knew King Minos was going to come after him, Daedalus had a son, Icarius, and so he planned, with the help of Pashape, he planned his escape, and he invented these wings to jump off the island and fly to another one. And he made it, but the sun went too high, and the wax that he used to put these wings together melted, and his son fell into the water and drowned. But Daedalus made it over to Sicily, in that area, one of the islands, and became another inventor for one of the kings there. But King Minos found him, and knew he was there because he was searching all over, and he came up with this trick where he would ask the kings to see if they could figure out how to pull a thread through a shell. And he knew if they could figure it out, they got it from Daedalus. And he went to this one king, Cocalus, and the king went to Daedalus and presented the way to do it, which was putting an ant, tying the string to an ant, and putting sugar at the other end so the ant would go through and pull the string through the shell. And so he found out that that's where Daedalus was. He knew it, but They tricked him and put him into a bath with hot water, and then the king came out and killed him and drowned him, and then they returned the body and lied and said he slipped and fell and drowned. And so the people of Crete took King Minos and buried him with an elaborate tomb. He's as the son of Zeus. I'm sure that tomb is still out there in Crete somewhere. But that was the end of King Minos. And it's interesting. So we don't know what happened to Pashapi, and she had, several children. And I just told you one of the oldest son was killed. Um, Ariadne ran off with Dionysus, and Phaedra ended up marrying Theseus, but then committing suicide. So quite a salacious and violent history with these ancient people who were of giant stature, but definitely, this is why I separate out my work from my earlier children's work. So I'm going to read some of this from the Library of History of Diodorus Siculus. And I'm just going to skip through some of it and get to the main parts about Theseus. Okay, we're going to jump into, after the murder of Androgeus. Okay, the Athenians obeyed the order of the god, and Minos commanded them that they should give 7 youths and as many maidens every 9 years to the Minotaur for him to devour for as long a time as the monster should live. And when the Athenians gave them, the inhabitants of Attica were rid of their evils, and Minos ceased warring on Athens. At the expiration of 9 years, Minos came again to Attica, accompanied by a great fleet, and demanded and received the 14 young people. Now Theseus was one of those who were to set forth, and Agis made the agreement with the captain of the vessel that if Theseus should overcome the Minotaur, they should sail back with their sails white, but if he died, they should be black, just as they had been accustomed to do on the previous occasion. When they had landed in Crete, Ariadne, the daughter of Minos, became enamored of Theseus, who was unusually handsome. And Theseus, after conversing with her and securing her assistance, both slew the Minotaur and got away safely, since he had learned from her the way out of the labyrinth. In making his way back to his native land, he carried off Ariadne and sailed out unobserved during the night. After which he put in at the island, which at that time was called Dia, but is now called Naxos. At the same time, the myths relate, Dionysus showed himself on the island, and because of the beauty of Ariadne, he took the maiden away from Theseus and kept her as his lawful wife, loving exceedingly. Indeed, after her death, he considered her worthy of immortal honors because of the affection he had for her, and placed among the stars of heaven the crown of Ariadne. But Theseus, they say, being vexed exceedingly because the maiden had been taken from him, and forgetting because of his grief the command of Agis, came to the port in Attica with the black sails. And Agis, we are told, witnessing the return of the ship and thinking that his son was dead, performed an act which was at the same time heroic and a calamity. For he ascended the Acropolis, and then, because he was disgusted with life by reason, his excessive grief cast himself down the height. After Agis had died, Theseus, succeeding in the kingship, ruled over the masses in accordance with the laws, and performed many deeds which contributed to the aggrandizement of his native land. The most notable which he accomplished was the incorporation of the demes, which were small in size, but many in number, into the city of Athens, since from that time on the Athenians were filled with pride by reason of the importance of their state, and aspired to the leadership of the Greeks. But for our part now, that we have set forth facts at sufficient length, we shall record what remains to be said about Theseus. Okay, now I'm going to stop for a minute. Minos also had another son named Deculon, who ended up being the ruler of Crete, and he eventually formed an alliance with the Athenians, and then he gave Phaedra in marriage to Theseus. So let me continue to read on a little bit. Deculon, the eldest of the sons of Minos, which he was the ruler of Crete, formed an alliance with the Athenians and united his own sister Phaedra in marriage to Theseus. After the marriage, Theseus sent his son Hippolytus, who had been born to him by the Amazon, to Troezen to be reared among the brothers of Athra. And by Phaedra he begat Acamas and Demophon. A short time after this, Hippolytus returned to Athens for the celebration of the mysteries, and Phaedra, becoming enamored of him because of his beauty at that time after he had returned to Troezen, erected a temple of Aphrodite beside the Acropolis at the place where one could look and see at Troezen. But at a later time, when she was stopping together with Theseus at the home of Pythias, she asked Hippolytus to lie with her. Upon his refusal to do so, Phaedra, they say, was vexed, and on her return to Athens, she told Theseus that Hippolytus had proposed lying with her. And since Theseus had his doubts about the accusation, he sent for Hippolytus in order to put him to the test, whereupon Phaedra, fearing the result of the examination, hanged herself. As for Hippolytus, who was driving a chariot, when he heard of the accusation, he was so distraught in spirit that the horses got out of control and ran away with him. And in the event, the chariot was smashed into bits, and the youth, becoming entangled in the leathern thongs, was dragged along till he died. Hippolytus then, since he had ended his life because of his chastity, received at the hands of the Trojan honors equal to those offered of the gods. But Theseus, when after these happenings he was overpowered by a rival faction and banished from his native land, met his death on foreign soil. The Athenians, however, repenting of what they had done, brought back his bones and accorded him honors equal to those offered to the gods. And they set aside in Athens a sacred precinct which enjoyed the right of sanctuary and was called after him the Theseum. Okay, so I'm going to stop a little bit and move on a little bit to some of the rest of this. As I said, Theseus went on some labors to emulate what Heracles had done. And he went after some really nasty people that were murdering just average people. Okay, I'm going to read a little bit here again from Diodorus Siculus's The Library of History. The first, then, whom he slew was he who was called Corynetus, who carried a corny, as it was called, or club, which was the weapon with which he fought, and which it killed any who passed by. And the second was Caenis, who made his home on the isthmus. Caenis, it should be explained, used to bend over two pines, fasten one arm to each of them, and then suddenly release the pines, the result being that the bodies were pulled asunder by the force of the pines, and the unfortunate victims met a death of great vengeance. For his third deed, he slew the wild sow, which had its haunts about Cramion, a beast which excelled in both ferocity and size, and was killing many human beings. Then he punished Scarion, who made his home in the rocks of the Megaris, which are called after him the Scaronian rocks. This man namely, made it his practice to compel those who passed by to wash his feet at a precipitous place, and then suddenly, giving them a kick, he would roll them down the crags into the sea at a place called Chelone. And near Eleusis, he slew Sirion, who wrestled with those who passed by and killed whomever he could defeat. After this, he put to death Procustus, as he was called, who dwelt in what is known as Corydalus in Attica. The man compelled the travelers who passed by to lie down upon a bed, and if any were too long for the bed, he cut off the parts of their body which protruded, while in the case of such as were too short for it, he stretched their legs, this being the reason why he was given the name Procustus. After successfully accomplishing the deeds which we have mentioned, Theseus came to Athens, and by means of the tokens caused Agis to recognize him. Then he grappled with the Marathonian bull which Heracles, in the performance of one of his labors, had brought from Crete to the Peloponnesus, and mastering the animal, he brought it to Athens. The bull Agis received from him and sacrificed to Apollo. It remains for us now to speak of the Minotaur, which was slain by Theseus, in order that we may complete our account of the deeds of Theseus. Okay, I'm going to stop. So I just told you, his story. This guy, he emulated Heracles. He did 6 labors, killed off some of these beastly men who were just disgusting, and the sow animal that was killing humans. And then he went and he got rid of the Minotaur, and then he was going to take Ariadne as his wife, but Dionysus wanted her. So he gave her up, and unfortunately, when he came back, he didn't make the sails of the ship white, and the king killed himself, and Theseus took over Athens. And then I told you about the son of Minos making a truce and giving Phaedra, the sister of Ariadne, to Theseus. And then she fell in love with his son and tried to seduce him, and it didn't work, and so she ended up killing herself out of humiliation, and the son ended up in an accident, and Theseus was then kicked out of Athens and met his fate on foreign soil, but his body was brought back and given honors. So within this tale of Theseus is also a hidden human story, and we don't know what that Minotaur was. I feel like it was either some kind of an individual with a deformity, or it was a man putting a bull's head on and taking vengeance on the Athenians for the murder of King Minos' elder son. But as I said, a hidden human story of who knows what that Minotaur was. And I believe Ariadne faked her death and reinvented herself with Dionysus in Egypt. So that is the tale of Theseus and Isis-Ariadne and the Minotaur. Thank you.